was they're just going to happen. But yeah, on the topic of the Ferrari stuff, right? That's honestly an entire shit show still. People are extremely critical of Faye. I don't know how much you guys paid attention. Oh, yeah, you're. One second, I can hear the YouTube now, and I didn't realize I still had to go. It is still a complete shit show, right? The important thing to note is that the bug that was live in the Ferrari code had been there for a little while. It was there for like 3 to 4 months. It had been introduced literally by a suggestion that an auditor from QuantStamp had recommended. And realistically, it wasn't something that, for the most part, people would be able to acknowledge or deal with ahead of time, right? Like, there are certain things you should be able to make every unit test for everything, but in that case, I honestly don't blame the devs too much. And in general, unless there's egregious issues, like I think the Nomad stuff is something that you do just blame the devs, then you can't ever really blame them. And moving on to the next topic, which is like, how do you recover from that? And that's really where the shit show comes in on Rari's end, or Ferrari's end. Is immediately after the hack, I got on even actually with the Ferrari community. I was probably the most positive person on the call because I knew that all of my protocol's money was safe. But it seemed very clear talking with Joey and everybody else that there was an extremely strong indication that they would pay everybody back. That was what was implied by their DAO to begin with. And then within the next few days, they did a vote. And I think 90% of the snapshot voted for full reimbursement. Here we are 2-3 months later. It's about three months in a week. And there's no actual action in that direction yet. The only thing that had happened since was the actual on-chain vote when Faye, the DAO themselves, completely changed 180 on that and rejected everything completely. So I don't know what to say about that, right? I think the biggest thing on our end was just being clear about our expectations and our security procedures for our users. I wrote an article afterwards on, how you should prepare for issues, right? You should expect for them to happen. You should have emergency withdrawal procedures, and you should just be ready to execute them. And I'm actually quite proud of my protocol in this situation because we had those ready and we were able to do it and save funds without any scary issues. On Yield's end, they did not have any of these. And I spent the last 24 hours investigating their issue, and it turns out that they did successfully white hat all of their at-risk funds, but it took them 3 or 4 tries with failed transactions to do so, which means that at any given point, anyone that is using a generalized front-running bot could have found that and taken all of their money. It's like fucking terrifying. So I think the really big takeaway is be prepared and plan into your contracts, procedures, at least for the first year or two, to kind of just, oh shit, get everything out. Yeah.
This whole subject, from my perspective, and it might be helpful for me to just say, 5 seconds what I'm building. So I'm co-founder at Nft Finance, and our mission is to accelerate adoption of DeFi and blockchain technologies, and we do that by informing participants about the rewards, but also the risks involved. And it's tough. We talk to a lot of family offices and more traditional investors, and whatever reason we can give of, it was this or it was that, don't worry about this, that they just basically listen to the headlines of, DeFi is too risky. And so this is something, this is me more lamenting than coming up with a solution. But, maybe a question, and anyone could take this one, is, how can we reduce the surface area of this type of exploit, hack, or weakness in what we're building, so that, we can start to say, well, it's not as risky as it used to be. I don't know if anyone wants to take that.
I've got some ideas, but I don't want to take over everything. Yeah, Shawn, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some really interesting things, both on the user side as well as the dev side. So one, I think people are trying to make smart contract auditing easier for folks. So like, I know that's a huge bottleneck for devs. It's just like, I hear horror stories of waiting 6 to 12 months just to get like a 1 week review. So I've talked to some teams that are in that process. I think on the consumer side, some interesting companies that are focused on real-time hack protection. So being able to monitor your wallet, and when you start to notice that there's drains, basically performing some sort of self-mev action to halt that that trade, I think is an interesting opportunity. But curious to hear what you all have heard as well. Like the other thing, I just spoke with Sam Blackshear from Miston Labs, and even at the programming language level, there's an opportunity to think about how smart contract languages are designed better, and now Move is being used across the kind of Aptos, Miston Sui level, and I think that's an opportunity for other types of controls to be put in. But it's not everything. There's always social engineering, right? And that's just a basic human fallacy. We can't stop. You read about every day Bored Ape Yacht Club influencer being hacked or something like that. So not to poke fun at them, but it happens to all of us. But love to hear what you all have to say. Danny, seems like you want to.
I think it's like, Shawn, you brought up like two systemic risks. There's first like issues in the code, and then there's the difference between that and social engineering. And I think social engineering will probably come, like both, I think will ultimately there'll be controls to the point you started talking about, some of like making smart contract more easy, more accessible. How do we automate it, right? How do we make that maybe less of a human driven process, right? And I think ultimately you just, as you've seen things like Copilot, I'm not technical, but how you've seen things like understand like Copilot and other applications that kind of help devs think write better code. I think that intrinsically will go. Also, I think like the quality of code, there's just so many devs coming to this space, and I assume that the quality of code and coders, it only compounds and gets better over time. So I think that there's an element of the code itself getting better and the devs writing it better. I also think, to your point, that there's going to be certain applications that help. Yeah, I think it's really cool that there's like automations potentially that, hey, notice there's an issue's happening. How do we like stop and mitigate that? I think ultimately, though, too, there will be things to mitigate those social engineering hacks, right? Like, I think there's already some really cool applications or services out there. You interviewed Rex from DeFi Safety. I really like what they do. I think they do good content and saying like, here's from a retail perspective, here's more and less risky protocols, right? And I think that if that can continue to evolve and be more quantitative, it's good. But it could be maybe even more quantitative and more driven, right? As they continue to look for correlations, things like that. But ultimately, I think too, there's probably just going to be so many fundamental infrastructure updates. To think about how the way we use MetaMask now to the way that we use wallets in the future. I think it's just going to look fundamentally different, where it's kind of opaque, especially when you're first coming in, of like, what am I approving this transaction, right? And I think it can become more clear, and I think it will become more clear over time. And I think even things like that fundamentally help help the everyday consumer. But Julian and Gabriel, I'd be really curious as like what you guys think from a protocol perspective, and like even talking maybe more on that dev side about how to maybe get ahead of some of these things and really kind of just like end to end, like how do you mitigate it from the code perspective, and how do you have established controls to mitigate when it does start to happen, right? Like what is the process? And I'd just be curious what you guys think.
Also interested in Julian's take on this, but just to bring 2 points from my own perspective, from my own dev perspective, I think that as Julian alluded to, this kind of pausable characteristic of the smart contract, you can code in there, let's say an emergency pause or a red button. You can definitely code that in, and there are standards for that, for instance, from Open Zeppelin. And overall, just basically defining some standards or best practices for the smart contracts as some of those EIPs that are being brought out, or for the vault standard, or even maybe a bridge standard. Those are the kind of things that I see happening now more than ever before in the smart contract level. That will be my take. What do you think, Julian?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely important, right? There's so much you can do as well once that comes from the smart contract itself, right? On our end, we have the entirety of our front end update automatically the second we pause the contracts, right? So it's like the entirety of our security procedures is essentially at this point automated once we get our pause through, and like that's saves so much effort on our end. Like we knew there was an issue, I found out what the issue was within 10 minutes. We paused the contracts within 20, and we had the remediation and like everything paused and good to go within 24 hours. We took a week to actually do it and make sure, but nonetheless.
Julian,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but like one thing I'd be interested in is even as you're going through this, like, lack of a better term, these change management processes, like, one thing that struck me, and Shawn, I think you talked about it on the Terra Luna episode, right? Is not only that Terra kind of like had that utter collapse, but they went the same as like Three Arrows Capital. They like went radio silent on people. So I'd be curious as to like how, when you're going through this transition, like how you consider engaging with your users.
I definitely err on the side of actual ethical legitimacy.
So you like want to be over to the extent that it doesn't create added risk. You want to over communicate,
to an extent, maybe not like over communicate. We didn't immediately ping everybody because no funds were at risk. We pinged everybody like at the end of that hour after we were done with everything, right? We don't have enough users where people are going to freak the fuck out when our contracts aren't available for 24 hours. So that wasn't as big of a deal for us. But the important thing, a lot of it is in the wording actually of what you're saying, not about whether you're saying it, right? And I'm going to call out Sense Protocol, which is one of our potential competitors. I actually very much like the founders, so this is not any slight towards them or even the project. But they had an issue recently where they were incorrectly distributing the yield from their protocol, and it's a yield tokenization protocol, so it's pretty integral. And they had to completely migrate their contracts. And they phrased this as like not a security issue or like an actual issue, but as like stars and like happiness, like rainbows of we're upgrading our contracts and this is such a good thing. And
that's a little deceptive.
That is the actual. That's the issue. You cannot do.
I can just to throw something in here. So our project that we're really working on a lot is providing transparency and visibility on multiple different protocols. I mean, the goal is to have an apples to apples across projects for common. But as we dig in, of course, we have to look at the smart contracts to be able to pull the right variables and what have you. And we're doing some kind of crazy stuff. It's we're oftentimes reporting inconsistent calculation errors. Sometimes people are doing things in just funny ways, and it's a bit shocking. And just to just one more point.
Really well. Sorry. You're finish up.
No, I just wanted to add one thing that I think maybe could help this situation. Is another project that came out of Kernel, which DeFi safety. It's in the right direction. It's not a complete solution, but they're coming up with a standards by which DeFi projects are judged. It's focused a lot more on the documentation quality. It's not an audit, but they look at how the audits are being. And hopefully as there are more space of this transparency and even coming up with best practices that we'll get to a point where people won't even participate in a project unless it's getting a good enough score by agencies like this. So but Julian, I think tack onto that.
I think it segues really well. Actually, I thought you were also going to mention a different project coming out of Kernel, Sherlock. And Sherlock started as pretty much purely an insurance protocol where they were having the same issues you were just talking about. It's just it's impossible to actually price the real risk. That's just kind of the truth. So Sherlock is over time, they first worked with Rajiv from Securium and like a bunch of various security projects. And this ended up turning into them ending up with an entire security team. And now they're effectively an auditor. So in order to even get coverage through Sherlock, you have to go through their auditing process. And I think that's really interesting.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That segues to my next point, which is like the easiest and best way is in code, in my opinion, or is not to, or rather not in code, but is to cover this is through incentives. I think that in the case of most DeFi protocols, you should be having a safety module. This is a easy thing to throw into your tokenomics, which I very much like, and helps prevent you becoming a security. But more than that, at a base level, it gives people confidence in your protocol. Aave obviously has a security module, and I mean, I'm going to be critical specifically on Fei. The Fei-Rari merger effectively turns Fei into, or it should have turned Fei into the security module for Rari. That's like what it implicitly does. It's the same exact
Julian,
concept. Yeah.
Julian, what do you mean by a security module exactly?
So I'll specify Aave's and because it's the most well known, and Swivel, we have ours as well. Obviously, if I'm so strong about this, of course I'm going to implement it on our end. But on Aave's end, you can deposit Aave tokens or Ethereum, but mostly Aave tokens. I believe it's an 80 to 20 ratio. And they provide liquidity with that on Balancer. And if there's ever a hack on Aave, the first people that cover those losses are those LPs, the people committing their liquidity security module. I think they can take upwards of 40% of that LP to cover the losses. And this is a very strong way to, again, ensure people have confidence in your protocol. But moreover, the people that do have the most confidence in your protocol, your actual stakeholders, have a way to signal that confidence, right?
Yeah. So effectively what you're saying is, right, like the way that it's structured is LPs assume some of the risk, and their ergo the LPs that come to it are like, I need to have confidence in this, and that when they do have confidence in that, it signals, hey, that this is a trustworthy protocol,
and
right?
Then from at least as an American developer's perspective, there is some defense here legally. I'm not a lawyer, so don't actually look at this, but
disclaimer.
The idea is that the only people that are profiting off of any revenues from the protocol, then, like, all of that revenue can be directed to these security module insurers, right? And then the claim cannot be that people are profiting off of the protocol. That's not what's happening. They are profiting off of their act of insuring the protocol. And that is very different. That essentially changes the dynamic from being, okay, they're just profiting from buying this thing and it being a security, to they actively are putting up their stake, doing something, and earning that revenue. I think literally everyone should have this.
Yeah, and I would say, just quick, in my opinion, so like high level credit, I'm protected if there's a hack, if there's some business going on, there's some bridge exploit. If we can bring end users credible insurance, this kind of solves so many problems for getting more traditional people into the space, because it's they think it's the Wild West. Don't play with what you can't afford to lose. But if we keep attaching all those disclaimers to what we're building, we're only going to build playgrounds for
I 100% agree. And I think for the most part, people in DeFi at least assume that this is there, even if it's not explicit. And it's just like this horrible relationship, right?
Assume that the risk is there, or assume that like the DeFi operates similar to TradFi, and like, oh, everything, like I can get my money back. Is that what you're saying?
They assume kind of that direction, but it's like all of these DeFi protocols raise maybe $5 to $10 million. Okay. They know that there's some valuation to these tokens. And at the end of the day, if there's a huge hack, what is going to happen? They're going to try to do as much as they can to use their treasury to backstop that risk and pay it off and pay back the users. So it's like, instead of doing this in this horrible and implicit way that leaves everyone kind of shitting their pants at last moment.
Got it.
Yeah. Like it's already like this. Just make explicit programs.
I think this need is going to persist, especially as we see the proliferation of DeFi mullets, which are basically fintech on the front, DeFi on the back, right? So consumers are going to expect the kind of security and safety of fintech, especially as this persists across the rest of the non-US world as well, and DeFi becomes a really valuable. I wanted to see, Greg, you talked about insurance and you brought it up, and also others have talked about it. Have you all looked into Nexus Mutual? I know that that's been a insurance company that's been a decentralized insurance protocol that's been around for a little while. Seen a lot of different scenarios, but what types of insurance options exist out there right now?
You guys want to go for it? Because I've done a lot of research on this, and I would just power through.
I'd love to actually hear. Yeah, I'm only familiar with
Go for it, because I've heard of a few different projects, Nexus, of course, being one, but I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Words at Bono, because there's desire.
Well, I mean, so I classify things into a few different models, and it just depends on where the capital comes from and how you're pricing the risk, right? So if the capital is coming from there are insurance companies that will just do it in a centralized way and give you insurance. This is largely for like ultra rich, I'm sure, but that does exist. Then there's kind of like the DeFi in the middle, which is there's a centralized actuary, right? Like a security team that comes in and prices things. And then there's decentralized pools of capital that actually pay for it, right? Or like are earning the yield. And I think Sherlock counts under that model. And then if you guys maybe have heard a protocol called InsureAce, they do as well. And then there's the last, which is just like pure market pricing. And this goes in a few directions. There's kind of something called protection markets, which are very much like lending markets. This is something that Cozy Finance does, as well as the Insure stuff. I think they might have merged at this point. I'm unsure. And then there's just like essentially betting markets, like binary options, where it's just, will there be a hack by X date, yes or no? And you buy one side of that, which is a completely fine way to do it.
We lose Julian.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay,
cool. You bugged out.
Yeah, like the only issue so far has been that InsureAce, using their centralized pricing, messed up massively. They price pretty much everything around 2%, including the chance of tether risk. Or not, sorry, UST
bargain
risk,
basement.
excuse me, UST risk. And this led to a ton of people buying like they bought out all of the coverage on InsureAce for the DPEG, and then we're just like eating that 20% yield, right? You're essentially locking in 18% for yourself. So that protocol is completely underwater right now. We'll see exactly where it goes.
Well, actually, this is something that I wanted to tack on, and why I haven't found what I'm looking. Because of these decentralized options, they're themselves in a way, in a broad. They're in the same system. SHIT really hits the fan. Are they going to be around to provide that coverage? It's one thing that I go to bring this to my clients. That sorry, that's it's not credible enough. But the other thing that I think Nexus specifically, there is this kind of decision part of their process where there is some sort of event, and then there's a review, a very human review, and they can just arbitrarily say, well, we don't want to. And so that very un-Web3 to me, the part of kind of arbitrary manual decision making. I don't think you might be paying 2%, but it's really going to be coverage at the end of the day.
Yeah, seems like very centralized decision making at that point.
Do you guys know maybe Claros? Have you heard of Claros?
Yeah, I heard of Claros. Yeah, is that the identity verification, right?
That's a different one that starts with a K, but I forget.
Okay, we're talking about different protocols.
So Claros is like a decentralized court. I don't honestly know that much about the implementation or anything, but I think that's what a lot of people are turning to make these decisions about whether to actually make the payout. Is like you're supposed to trust some otherwise trusted jury effectively And these people
Yeah.
are rewarded in Claros tokens for appropriately voting towards the right decision, if that makes sense. Something like that.
Who makes like, who's like, oh, you get like, who's paying out, who's making the effectively the determination that that was the right decision, and ergo allocating that capital to, you know, like,
I think
who's the arbiter
majority-
there? Because it just sounds like another layer of, you know
Don't
what I mean?
quote
It's,
me.
yeah,
Don't
okay,
quote
yeah,
me.
yeah.
I think if you vote with the majority, you win. So you would assume that the majority is voting right, and then it's blind. And
Yeah.
of course,
Okay.
then, yeah, like something like that. I think it's along those lines. So if you vote with the majority correctly, then you're rewarded.
It's a really
And also,
interesting
if you don't-
concept.
Sorry, and if you don't vote with the majority, your stake is then slashed. I believe it is
Okay.
something like this as well. Yeah,
Okay.
if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
So it's essentially
Yeah.
trying to just like game theory its way into being right every time, right?
Very, very interesting
I
dynamic.
can see some.
I wanted to transition in another
Is
another
that a sound
topic.
effect? That's great.
Into another topic, since we have let's see, probably have maybe another 20-30 minutes together. I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about new narratives and metrics. So TVL is one metric that I think the DeFi industry at large is focused on, right? So it's if we look at DeFi Llama, right, from the peak of, let's say, 200-ish billion, we're back down to about 67 billion, but we're seeing an upswing here. A lot of people have said, like, is TVL the right metric to use to measure DeFi protocol success? Just because we've seen some gaming of that, right? On Solana, we saw Saber just like
Explicitly.
profiles who get like 12 different protocols that pumped each other up, right? Basically double counting all the up the wazoo. I know Xerox and GMI, the maintainer of DeFi Llama, lamented this and was really disillusioned them in terms of the DeFi industry overall. But at the same time, we're starting to see new narratives, right? So Ethereum is still the dominant chain by far, and part of this decreasing TVL is due to naturally token prices dropping. But when we look at some of the newer L2s, especially the ones that are introducing liquidity incentives like Optimism, they're starting to take hold. At one point, I think Optimism was taking over Polygon, and now it's over $1 billion in TVL almost overnight with the liquidity incentives program being introduced. So what I wanted to ask you all, and I'll stop sharing my screen right now, is TVL the right metric to measure the success of the DeFi protocol? If not, like what should we be using, and how can we communicate that to consumers, investors, et cetera, to make sure that that's something that they use to judge the health of a protocol or an ecosystem? Greg, I saw you shaking your head, so you want to kick things off?
Yeah. Fundamentally, a good guide with value capture and ideally the now or eventual business model of things. So yeah, one metric that will cover all projects, but I think examples, if you think about a DEX, for example, their value add is trading trades, and so how much volume is being traded, how much, although they're not currently capturing fees to the protocol, there's a running around that they will. So could that metric, at least for a DEX, it's how much volume is being transacted per day. It's a tough one, but at the end of the day, if it's like these inflate incentive, just artificial incentive, inflated, it doesn't work. So yeah, I'm giving more problems than solutions. I don't know if anyone else has a comment, an idea.
You guys? I'll go for it. I think it depends just completely on the project, right?
Yeah.
I think it makes sense for stuff like straight lending protocols where I mean, their revenue is based on how much they have deposited, right? That's pretty simply all they do. For folks like ourselves, it's literally a complete sham metric, right? I think so. Swivel is a yield tokenization protocol that takes the yield-bearing deposit on places like Compound, Aave, etc., and splits it apart from the actual deposit itself. And this effectively means that split interest is sort of a derivative. And on our end, the way that we make money is when people actually actively trade that derivative. So we actually specifically have a bunch of competitors using AMMs, and to attract liquidity, and just in general keep things sufficient, they have to have a way higher TVL. They have to provide incentives for that TVL. But what this leads to, again, because it's a derivative, we make nothing from that passivity, is a lot of these folks are giving out incentives, maybe like thousands a day, for what's maybe like 50 cents in revenue a day, to like $1 for some of these guys. Maybe more. I'm probably underselling it there, but like it's really nowhere close. And on our end, I mean, we use an order book, which means things are a bit fundamentally different. And our incentive scheme is specifically to incentivize volume rather than TVL. This means our TVL is like maybe 1/10 of someone like a competitor Element, but we do more volume than everybody else combined. So this means we have more revenue than everybody else combined. Still, I don't think is quite break even. Like that's the DeFi thing. But yeah, like it depends on the project. For DEXs, it's different. A lot of folks, let's say for Uniswap, they don't even have a protocol fee right now. I think that's actually another interesting conversation. Is a lot of people came out and said that the average Uniswap LP is losing money, but that's the point. So I don't know if you can actually even like gauge anything on that. Yeah, I don't know. TLDR, it depends.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, here in revenue volume, Gabriel, go ahead.
Like,
yeah, sorry, I just sent here what I wanted to add. I was a couple of weeks back at ECC in Paris, and one of the talks I heard there was Kane there from Synthetics, and he mentioned more or less this point that Greg brought up regarding this product market fit of protocols. And that means instead of TVL, the metric, in his opinion, should be the fees collected by the protocol, which would then be a representative, so a KPI of this product market fit, which is very important right now since it's a building phase, it's a bear market, or let's call it bear market right now. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said of fees, and it remains to be seen how it will this picture change regarding collection of fees now only for LPs or really on a protocol level. Yeah.
The only thing I would tack on.
Yeah, go on.
The only thing I would tack on that is,
I think it's a legitimate
business to not turn on
fees, but no.
So
it's just common.
Many projects were like this. Even Uber,
they were.
I think they should be judged on the potential of the fees captured, and not just the current fees. Yeah. Projects like Uniswap, because by that metric, Uniswap.
It's almost like almost like a major social platform, like you mentioned, being free to grow significantly, and then turning on monetization ads, and ultimately users will stay if they have product market fit.
Yeah. When we talk about TVL and it like being like a signal for success, I think that like it kind of depends on, or like I guess to even take that back a step, it's like, is it really a signal for success for who, right? Is it for the protocol? Is it a signal to like me as an investor or as a retail investor to be like, oh, this has a high TVL, that signals that it's more credible, as ergo I can assume more people use it, right? I think it kind of depends on, like, I think that signal, it's I guess to get to the point, I think it's like important, but it's obviously not I don't think it's the best metric, but I do think it can serve as a signal. I wouldn't say that it's always necessarily the most successful one. I think there's probably still even some Web2 metrics that still can be maybe not public to us as as investors or people outside of the organization. People within it, though, certainly I think pay attention. And I'd be interested, Julian, right, and Gabriel and Greg, to what you guys think. But like, I still feel like there's a large degree of Web 2 metrics that are extremely relevant to indicate how a protocol success is doing, right? Like a burn rate has to be one of the most important metrics, especially now in kind of a bear market, right?
People are troubling Anchor about all the time, right? Their burn rate, their runway looked pretty horrible, and I think people the skeptics were right.
I say yes and no to the burn rate, right? Yes. Historically, the issue is that if you're not willing to just throw money at things, you're gonna fail in crypto, right? Because other people, and I'll even
any
myself
venture
as
for
the
that matter.
example. Yeah, like we raised in the bear market a little over $1 million, and then we raised again last year, and we're very, very choosing with our investors. So we raised at a far lower valuation, and we raised a total of 5.15 million compared to some of our competitors that have raised like 30 plus. So like, are they really doing anything wrong by throwing money at the issue? Probably not. That said, I don't even know if the metrics are so nebulous in Web3 that and they're also paid for, that it's all just like it's still so fundamental for me that I barely pay attention to many of them. Right.
Well, how many of them directly correlated with venture capital inflow into the market?
Yeah,
right.
That's kind of the point, right? And especially with, let's say if a protocol is getting $30 million in their Series A, right? Then of course this is going to come along with a large amount of deposits into the protocol from the same investors. And then those investors, let's say they might have heard about some airdrop in the example of Ribbon. And then all of a sudden there's like a few $1 million across a few hundred accounts that all look like real people, and are effectively making your metrics look amazing. I don't know.
Yeah.
When Danny mentioned Web 2 metrics, the first thing that came to mind,
some Web 2 stuff.
User
retention.
Kind of
this.
We've got
you.
That's cool.
But
can you keep
them
and how active? Just
someone registered is not
enough. It would have to be a project
thing,
a lending borrowing protocol. You're not going to
daily actives
as being the primary, but for other projects it would be. But I would love to think about that as potential,
adding to the
tricks to be adopted. I don't know if you guys have.
I know DAppRadar has some good metrics on, I think, active users over a 24-hour, 7-day, 30-day period. Sometimes when I look at it, I'm just like surprised at how few users.
How few,
right?
Yeah.
Especially some of the metaverse projects, right? So like, I don't want to name any of them specifically, but of users, right, on a monthly basis, and they're valued at like similar levels as like Roblox or other kind of metaverse, Web 2 metaverse plays, right? So go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to say,
I think that's a great point. And, there's a glass half full, glass half
a perspective
to this is
kind of like, hey,
we're
our economy now of crypto,
different metrics
even
on that,
but let's call it 100
billion.
Many
these projects have 100, maybe
1,000
users.
So glass half empty.
Jesus, that really sucks. Glass
half full.
We built $1 trillion economy on this number of users.
And how it's going to be once we
get real mainstream adoption.
That's the way I think about things.
But just to put some spice to
that,
I think this is really only going to happen once we think of more real world applications, meaningly, we got to think of off-chain, on-chain stuff, a
little bit out of the metaverse,
as well as
cool stuff that we're doing in our own
universe here.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're absolutely right on, like, we have to figure out, like, because ultimately I think where DeFi becomes value isn't necessarily we look at it as like an investment or in like a way for us to do financial transactions and ultimately make money off that, but more so it's just the infrastructure, right? I think like that's ultimately where I think DeFi is going to fundamentally move to, where because with the idea of smart contracts and being able to automate effectively like processes and workflows, it seems to make so much sense that we can move from a title like a home sale, right, that can take 30 months in the United States, just from the point of even like we've agreed to close and go to, right, that continuously can be on chain. It can be like effectively turned into only the amount of time necessary to effectively review the deal and validate, have stage gates along the way. So it could go from, 30-day process to like hours if we needed to, maybe a week is probably more of a realistic thing just to make sure each party has the opportunity to review things. And I think the more we move towards that use case, and right, where even, let's say, institutions are using, the efficiency of blockchain technology to facilitate payments amongst each other. I think like once we get there, that's where I think DeFi really starts to like unlock its true potential. I kind of agree with you. Like I got the Oculus in the other room, metaverse. I think there's a huge use case for it in gaming. I see that immediately in the shorter term. I question sometimes some a little bit more of the longer term of, are we really going to be all meeting in the metaverse for work and all these other, we will maybe, but I don't think necessarily that's going to lead to more contentment or fulfillment. I don't think it's going to make us, I don't think that it's going to be like a net positive necessarily to society to just be living in the metaverse as opposed to living in the real world. I mean, they're to kind of show mental health can go down for people who use the.
What's your definition of metaverse?
It's a good point. That's a nebulous, elusive term.
At least a 1 hour podcast is to talk about that.
Yeah, just about that. I think that there's a lot of different ways to capture it, right? I would say less about on the spectrum of centralized versus decentralized, but more as this like a digital world where individuals can interact and engage with each other. I think that, again, there's a spectrum of like, is it immersive or not? And I think more immersive definitely is getting more in the space of the metaverse, but like we use GatherTown, right? And I would say GatherTown is on that spectrum of counting itself in the metaverse in some sense, right? Where it's a meeting place for us to come digitally and engage with each other. But I don't know. What do you think? That's like my point of view, or how I look at it.
I define it like, I don't know. This is me making something up right now, so keep that in mind.
Yes, I was kind of
Yeah, I define it mostly as some like the ability to live digitally, right?
Yeah.
And this to me isn't just like a game, but this is either all of your social interactions and all that. That's what most people focus on, or a way to live, right? Make money. And I, for the longest time, have literally just wanted that to be all people do, is inject crypto payment rails into video games and to provide incentivization schemes. I think historically, so for context, I played MOBAs professionally before I did crypto. And I got up to the final game where if we had won, we would be playing in the LCS for League of Legends, etc. And by final game, I mean that they had provided an incentivization structure where anybody in the world could go play this tournament. And if you won your way all the way up through the tournament, you would face the last team in the pro league. And if you beat them, you were pro. It was that simple. You could live and you knew exactly how to go from A to B and become a professional. And for me, the extension of this and how you really live in the metaverse is you just pay your best players, right? Like how much does it really cost to, on average, pay the top 500 Overwatch players $50,000 a year? And how much do you really get in advertising value from doing so? It's huge. The incentivization from the top down, just by paying your best players, is insane. People go fucking insane right now just for a little badge on the profile. What will they do for $50,000?
That's true.
It seems like we can't escape the attention economy, right? What I'm hearing is we're still capitalizing on attention, right? Where people spend their time, where people spend their.
That's where we're already at, and it just seems like the issue there is legal, honestly, where like it would kind of turn into child slaves, right? Like it's all children that's earning this money. So I get that. but fuck it. Just like get some international crypto company that just makes a regular game and pays people, and like just change the incentivization scheme.
So it, to me, in theory, that makes more sense. But then you look at like Axie Infinity, right? Which, you know, I don't want to use the P word, but it certainly relied on, you know, individuals. Like you had to assume that someone would come and buy your Axie, right, for more money than you either earned for it or paid for it itself, right? And that clearly isn't a sustainable structure, right? So as soon as that incentive financial kind of went down, and clearly they had the bridge hack, right? You know, that liquidity left that project so quickly, right? And that was the benchmark of play to earn in the future, right? Like all this and that. And I just think, to me, it makes me question, like, I do think that there's a world where like the best gamers in the world should be incentivized for that. That is a skill, right? That is truly a skill.
Though, is they weren't incentivizing the best gamers.
That
was like, it's the difference between pay to win and PvP, right? Like, if you're
play to win.
Pay to win is like the biggest criticism you can give of a game these days, in that, you know, you join it and you're leveling up, and then they give you an option to spend 5,000 gold to skip 2 levels, and that 5,000 gold costs $9.50 or like $10, but the buy options are only up to $9.50, so you actually have to buy it twice, right? Like there's these bullshit tricks that people use. And this is Axie, right? Like, you had to buy your characters. You could buy the best characters to be successful and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure there was some dynamic to it that was competitive, but you compare that to, you know, I just want to sell copies of my game and or sell skins, right?
Yeah.
Like, how many players will I attract by ensuring that there is a competitive, professional, public scene that anyone can partake in? And for me, like, it's not even close. Again, the reason League of Legends is the game it is today is because of that incentivization scheme. And this has led to the toxic environment that League of Legends is today, and just the insane competitiveness that is from bronze up, from like average people up. People will go insane playing that game. And it's for a reason, right? It comes from somewhere. I'm just waiting for people to do this, right?
To pay.
Riot was planning to with their with Valorant. This was like a big rumor for Valorant, but I guarantee you that, again, they hit regulatory issues which Web3 companies wouldn't face.
Yeah.
Well, you referenced the P word. I think Danny referenced the P word. You know, I don't know if we've got just a few minutes left. Does anyone want to step on that landmine and start talking about Ponzis and Ponzinomics, given that all that's going on? Or Shawn, would you like to say that?
I wondered if we could.
Okay.
I wonder if we could end on a positive note and talk about some of the
narratives.
The new narratives that
when you sold in the Ponzi, I think. You know.
The new narratives which we think to sell, man. So
some exit liquidity. Sorry.
the Ponzis are all deflated at this point, even stepping. But why don't we talk about some of the new narratives? And I think that'll set the vibe for a good exit. So I wanted to talk about so one thing that a few of us are involved with is the NFT financialization space. So myself are going to be helping out with a hackathon that we are working with Macro Hacks as well as 1KX on. So would definitely recommend folks to talk to build in this hackathon, which is really focused on how do we introduce new DeFi primitives within the NFT space. There's a lot of interesting sponsors like Nft Fi, even Ronin, part of Axie, going back to the previous conversation, Decentral Games, SudoSwap, Goblin Sack. So a lot of interesting things happening there. I think another interesting narrative is, especially if we look at like the DAO world, if you look at the even during the bear market, the number of space being added is just growing pretty significantly overall. We have refi. We talked with Spirals Pro how to actually think about the climate impact and how do you get folks this probably is the broader spectrum of DeFi protocol users into the space because they are really concerned about the climate impact and the like. So this is a way for projects to actually add that. And then we have new chains like Sui, new L1s. I talked with Sam Blackshear yesterday just about Sui and the opportunities that it builds, and they even specifically call some examples of, for example, loans and other types of projects which can be built on this relatively efficiently. So what I wanted to end on, what projects are you all excited about moving forward? And in some of these, what can we be excited about? We're all down in this market, and both figuratively and literally in some cases. But what kind of beacons of light are there?
I don't know if this counts as a project or more kind of a movement, but the kind of the ZK EVM projects are really getting me excited. I think it's solving multiple problems simultaneously, or it has the potential to solve multiple problems: scalability, privacy, and still maintain kind of the ecosystem without throwing a wrench in everyone's plans to learn new languages and what have you. So I don't know, that gets me pretty excited.
I think that people underestimate how much is going on in DeFi. And I think a lot of developers and people in general are still scared to go to the next level of rehypothecation, in that, right now there's protocols like myself, like Swivel, where we're built on top of Compound. And, in general, a lot of people are willing to accept this one layer of, DeFi. They call it building blocks, but there's really only like one floor. And I think really that next step is what we're going to be seeing, right? We saw an explosion of funding last year for DeFi projects, which are doing that that next layer. And everyone that is going to be successful coming out of that is having folks build on top of them. I would give a specific example in the fixed rate space because that's what I'm familiar with. We're building an aggregator that aggregates all the fixed rates, which is like that is the next step on our end. And then beyond that, there's a really cool protocol called Contango, which is building expirable futures markets on top of fixed rates as well. And then there's another really cool project called Fiat DAO, which is building lending markets specifically for the derivatives that pop out of fixed rates, right? These are all extremely cool, and like they serve the entire narrative of this contiguous ecosystem where everything is modular and everything can kind of work together. And then that's when you really get stuff that DeFi can do that TradFi can't. And the specific example that I like to give is, let's say you're lending using Swivel or any of our competitors. You end up with an IOU that says, I'm able to get $100 by December 31st. Well, you have an IOU. Traditionally, this IOU is fucking useless. You kind of are just stuck with it. In DeFi, you can program in, and someone will know that by this date, you will have that money, and you can write options with it, right? So all of a sudden, you're able to do something in DeFi you can't traditionally. You're able to lend and underwrite an option at the same time. These are like, there's a ton of this. This is like obviously exclusive to what we're working on, but there's a lot more going on in DeFi than people kind of are giving credit for, at least for now.
Yeah.
You guys got anything interesting? Give me what Windows working
Gabriel.
on a little bit and you're pumped for.
I'm waiting for Gabriel to go. I want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I do have one simpler use case, actually, going back to the financialization of NFTs, as was the topic that Shawn suggested. There are a couple of protocols or ideas that came out of Kernel. One of them is, of course, charged particles, which are basically trying to power NFTs with financial services. That's a very cool project. What I like is also in this that kind of financialization of NFTs is basically using NFTs as collateral for all kinds of DeFi applications, like loans or trying to do some liquidity provisioning using NFTs as your collateral, or what is your backing up your position. Also a couple of problems in there. So how can you really define the value of the NFT you're holding? Is it really only the floor price, or can you try to price it in a different way, like the inherent value of the community, or is there a different kind of indicator there that you can predict the value of the NFT on. But this kind of using NFTs as part of your portfolio is what also gets me excited in this new world, I would say.
Yeah. So it's obviously for me, I'm super stoked for Deep Balancer, Window, and Swivel. These are clearly the best companies in the entire DeFi space.
Bring on DeFi Summer 3.0.
Yeah, for
watch
sure.
out for these guys.
Yeah, I didn't mean it. I mean that, but a couple things that I think are certainly, I think in this next wave, right, is thinking about DAOs. I'm pretty like, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to really harness, bring capital together. And Shawn, I know you're very bullish on investment DAOs, and I think that that's makes so much sense. And so I think that there's a huge element of treasury management within that, and really being able to use that capital that maybe would just be sitting there and deploy it in ways that traditionally I don't think normal finance would allow for, right? So I think there's something there. I think also decentralized science is something that I just think it's so cool, the concept, right? The idea that individuals can come together, let's say they have a rare disease, and they organize and coordinate in a way that effectively, helps finance and even bring to market and trial drugs in ways that really provide therapies for others. I think as well with refi, you talked about it. I think that there's some element of me is just go plant a tree, right? Sometimes, but I think that there is beauty in bringing the carbon markets on chain. And I really like what the guys at Toucan are doing. And I think there's also an opportunity to kind of even leverage oracleize geospatial data in ways that, again, I think a kernel project, Astral, I believe is the name of it, doing some cool stuff there. And then, Greg, I know we've talked about this before too, but the opportunity to bring all real tangible assets such as homes, cars, things of this nature, and bring those on chain and automate that workflow and, facilitate that value capture in ways. And then the last thing I think that's kind of untapped is this concept of loyalty, right? I think that I used to, I'm a consultant, right? So I got all the points in the world, right? I think that there's a huge opportunity for that element to also those points to effectively become on chain, and then to be able to use that as actual liquidity, where in the past you never could do that, right? And I see some individuals building towards that future as well. So I have a whole list of things that I had to write down just to make sure I could talk about them all.
Definitely,
Shawn,
a lot of.
You have to go as well.
Yeah, what do you think, Shawn?
So I think obviously some of the things I brought up initially in the question, I'm really excited about NFT financialization. I think that just unlocks a whole new level of need beyond just profile picture trading, basically, which is the current market. Investment DAOs, super bullish on. I wouldn't be involved with Hydra Ventures DAO if I wasn't bullish on investment DAOs. I think every internet community can have an investment DAO, has their own talent pool, has their own deal flow, has opportunities to build. And I think that's going to be an asset class on par, if not greater than venture capital itself. And then finally, I'd say very similar to you, Danny, refi and DeFi are interesting to me. I don't know if it's the right time for refi right now. The whole world is not focused on climate change right now. Yeah. We're focused on just surviving, but I think that may be a narrative afterwards. And then DeFi, I used to work in the biotech industry, so I think that's a super interesting area, especially combined with some of the different technologies we have. So I'm optimistic. I will say one last shout out to you all. Thank you all for. I think this has been a great conversation. Wanted to make a call out to the Nft Finance Hackathon that's happening August 16th through 30th. Danny, Greg, and I are helping out with that, and thanks to Peter Pan for involving us with that. Gitcoin is running a Money Legos hackathon starting Monday, so definitely encourage others to join. And we are really excited about the start of the KB7 Fellowship on September 9th. So we have a lot in store. I think we have a second kind of live-ish podcast that we're planning to share more details about that. So stay tuned for that. I think probably early mid-September. And with that, I'll make it a wrap. So it was great having you all on. Thank you for joining for the live broadcast, and whoever listens to the recorded session would love hear your thoughts. So we are Kernel DeFi Pod on Twitter. Danny, Julian, Gabriel, Greg, thanks for joining.
Thanks so much. It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Shawn.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Hope everybody has a great day.